If ships sank the way disaster movies show, everyone would see it coming. If panic spread the way we assume, the lifeboats would have filled instantly. The Titanic doesn't confirm either story. It systematically destroys both. The invisible impact. The iceberg didn't announce itself, it whispered. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic's hull made contact with a mass of ice below the waterline, and the damage was almost entirely silent from above. Not a crash, not a boom, a grinding vibration, subtle, strange, brief, traveled through the steel and into the feet of anyone standing on a lower deck. Then it stopped. That's the thing about catastrophic structural failure at sea. It doesn't always sound like catastrophe. It sounds like something you'd mention to a steward, shrug at, and go back to your cabin. The iceberg didn't punch a hole in the ship. It scraped along the starboard side, popping rivets and buckling steel plates across 6 separate compartments. The total opening created was less than 12 square feet, spread across 300 feet of hull. No single gash, just a series of small failures that added up to an irreversible one. People think the collision shook the ship violently. Actually, passengers in first class described feeling a faint shudder. Some thought they'd dropped a propeller blade. A few came out to the deck, saw nothing alarming, and went back to sleep. The ship didn't feel like it was dying, it felt like it had hiccuped. For the 2,224 people on board, the Titanic in those first minutes felt completely normal. The lights stayed on, the engines hummed, the carpets were dry. That's the cruelest part of this. The disaster had already begun, and almost nobody on the ship knew they were inside it. But that changes, slowly, and in the places no one was watching. The silent angle. By 12:05 a.m., the mailroom is underwater. 5 mail clerks are in the lower decks and they are hauling 200 sacks of mail up stairwells as seawater rises past their knees. They aren't evacuating, they're trying to save the letters. This is their job, and for a few extraordinary minutes, they are still doing it. Above them, the floor has tilted. Not dramatically, not enough to make you grab a railing, but enough that a marble placed on the deck would roll. The bow is beginning to press down. The stern is lifting almost imperceptibly off the water surface. Here's the physics. The 6 compromised compartments are taking on water, and water is heavy. The bow is getting heavier by the second. The ship was designed to stay afloat with 4 flooded compartments. 6 was one category beyond survivable. The math was already done. The outcome was already settled at 12:05 a.m., even as the band played upstairs and stewards told passengers to put on their lifebelts as a precaution. Down in the mailroom, the clerks are still there, still working. They all die. None of them are mentioned in most accounts. This is what the early disaster looked like. Not screaming, but bureaucratic duty meeting impossible physics in a flooding basement. And above them, the music is still playing. The Class Divide and the Delusion. By 12:30 a.m., the Titanic is performing 2 completely different realities at the same time. On the upper decks, the band is playing cheerful ragtime. The intention is calm, keep the mood light, prevent stampedes, load the lifeboats in an orderly fashion. It works. Tragically, completely, it works. Passengers look at the music, the lit chandeliers, the calm faces of the crew, and decide the lifeboats are the overreaction. The ship feels more solid than a small wooden boat swinging 45 feet above a black ocean. They choose the ship. The first lifeboat launched at 12:45 a.m. held 28 people. It was built for 65. On the lower decks, third-class passengers are navigating a maze they don't know in a language many of them don't speak. The gates separating third class from the upper decks existed because of immigration law. American customs required class separation to prevent disease transmission at ports. In an emergency, those gates became a sentence. Some crewmen opened them, many didn't. Some stewards actively directed third-class passengers back to their cabins to wait for instructions that never came. People think the class divide on the Titanic was about cruelty. Actually, it was mostly about confusion, a system designed for bureaucratic order that became a physical barrier when order became the wrong priority. No single villain, just a structure that revealed its own values under pressure. What this looked like, a non-English speaking family standing at a locked gate on Ejek, water now visible at the far end of the corridor, watching the lights above them through the metal bars, not yelling, waiting, because they'd been told their whole lives to wait when people in uniforms told them to wait. 60% of first-class passengers survived, 24% of third-class survived. The ship didn't treat everyone equally. It codified that inequality in architecture, and the architecture held even as the hull didn't. But even in first class, something is about to break the illusion entirely. The atmospheric screaming. At 1:30 a.m., the lights change. The bow is now fully submerged. Water has reached the boiler rooms, and as the fires are drowned, the electrical load shifts. The lights don't go out. Not yet. They dim. They take on a reddish, amber quality that passengers later described as hellish, wrong, alive. The quality of the light itself announces something the body understands before the mind does. The stern is now visibly elevated. The three massive bronze propellers, each weighing 38 tons, are lifting out of the water and rising into the night sky. Standing on the stern deck, you can look forward and see the bow has completely disappeared beneath the Atlantic. You are standing on what is effectively a ramp pointed upward at roughly 10 degrees and steepening. The noise is extraordinary. As pressurized air gets forced out of the ship's interior through any available opening, the Titanic screams, literally, a metallic, sustained shrieking that eyewitnesses in the lifeboats described as the sound of tearing and groaning, the voice of a structure being asked to do something its engineering could not permit. People think the final stage of a sinking ship is chaotic and fast. Actually, between 1:30 and 2:17 a.m., there are almost 40 minutes where survivors describe something close to structured horror. People lining up at the stern rail as if queuing, passengers kneeling in prayer on the tilted deck, crew members finishing their jobs even as the floor angle made standing difficult. What it felt like, cold. Not metaphorically, the temperature had dropped below freezing. The air itself was delivering a message. The ocean around the ship was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The human body has no defense against what's about to happen to it. The structural fracture. At 2:17 a.m., the Titanic breaks in half. The bow is now fully submerged. The stern is risen to roughly 45 degrees, some accounts say higher. The stress on the ship's keel, the central spine of the hull, has exceeded anything its steel was built to bear. The Titanic wasn't designed to be a vertical structure. It was designed to float horizontally, with weight distributed across its entire length. Now, all of that weight is leveraging against a single point. The steel gives. Not gradually, the break happens in seconds, and accounts differ on whether passengers heard it as a crack or a roar, or something that bypassed sound and became physical, a concussion felt in the chest. The lights go out at the moment of fracture. Total darkness, 2:17 a.m., mid-Atlantic Ocean, no moon. The bow section, now fully submerged, begins its long fall. It plunges at roughly 30 miles per hour through the water column, over 2 miles straight down, where it will hit the ocean floor at enough speed to bury its bow 30 feet into the sediment. It is still there. The stern section falls back onto the water. Momentarily, it's almost level. For a few seconds, people still on the stern might have felt something close to stability. Then it begins to fill. Then it begins to sink. Then it spirals and breaks further as it descends and reaches the ocean floor in pieces, scattered across a quarter mile. People think breaking in half was the moment everyone died. Actually, the break fractures over 1,000 people still on the ship directly into the water, alive, wearing life belts, into 28-degree water. And this is the part the survival statistics never prepare you for: the freezing silence. In 28-degree water, you have roughly 4 minutes of purposeful movement. The cold shock hits first, an involuntary gasp, hyperventilation, the body dumping adrenaline into a situation where adrenaline cannot help. In under a minute, the muscles of the hands and feet begin to fail. Swimming becomes inefficient, then impossible. The body begins pulling blood away from the extremities and concentrating it around the core organs. This is called cold incapacitation, and it is not peaceful. It feels like being compressed from the outside, like the ocean itself is squeezing inward. The screaming from the water is audible in the lifeboats. Survivors describe it as the worst sound they ever heard in their lives. Not individual cries, a collective human noise, a chorus of people in the ocean calling for help that wasn't coming. People think the people in the lifeboats could have rescued those in the water. Actually, most lifeboat occupants were too frightened of being swamped to row back. The few that did saved 6 people. 6 out of more than 1,500 in the water. The screaming lasted 20 minutes. Then it stopped. Not gradually. Witnesses say it tapered and then ended. And the silence that replaced it was worse than the sound. An ocean that had been full of human voices went quiet. The lifeboats sat in that silence for over an hour before the Carpathia arrived. That silence has a name, though no one ever gave it one. It is the sound of a completed disaster. The specific acoustics of an ocean that has received what it was going to take and settled. 710 people survived. 1,517 did not. The Carpathia reached the site at 4:10 a.m. By then, the water had been still for almost 2 hours. We talk about the Titanic as a story with a lesson: hubris, class, the arrogance of calling something unsinkable. But the actual timeline resists that framing. Most people on that ship had no arrogance about them. They were sleeping, or delivering mail, or waiting at a gate, or choosing the solid deck over a lifeboat because that choice seemed reasonable with the information they had. The question the Titanic leaves open isn't why it sank. The question is, what would you have done, standing on a tilting deck in the dark, with the band still playing, and nothing yet certain?